The morning my grandfather was buried, the sky over the Bitterroot Valley turned the color of old pewter. Snow came early that year. It always does in Montana when someone good leaves the world. I stood at the graveside holding my little sister's hand. She was 15, I was 19. And in 3 days, our uncle would try to take everything Grandpa Silas ever built and pave it flat for a housing development. But that's not the strangest part. The strangest part is what we found in the shed behind the apple orchard. The one Grandpa forbade us from entering our entire lives. The one with the rusted walls, the sagging roof, the boarded-up window. The one we discovered that cold October morning that had a brand new padlock on it. Heavy steel, not a speck of rust. Expensive. An 82-year-old man in patched overalls who complained about the price of chicken feed had put a $200 lock on a building that looked like a stiff wind could knock it down. Why, what we found beneath that shed 20 feet below the earth, sealed behind concrete and steel, was worth more than every house in the town of Stevensville put together. But the real secret, the one that would break my heart and put it back together in the same breath, wasn't the money. It was a promise, made in a small white church in the winter of 1943, and my grandfather had kept it his whole life. Our grandfather, Silas Hollister, was 82 years old when his heart gave out on a Tuesday morning while he was checking on the apple trees. That was the man who raised us, the man who picked us up from the wreckage of our parents' car accident on Highway 93 when I was 6 and Wrenley was 2. The man who taught me how to change a tractor filter and taught Wrenley how to press wildflowers between the pages of his Bible. He was our whole world, and he was gone. At the graveside, Pastor Bramwell was reading Psalm 23. The wind came down off the mountains and picked up the hem of my black dress. My knees were locked so tight they had gone numb, and I kept thinking one thing. Just one thing. Don't cry, Emmalyn. Because if you cry, Wrenley will break. And if Wrenley breaks, there is no one left in this world to hold her together. So I stood, and I did not cry. Pastor Bramwell closed the good book. He looked at me with those old gray eyes of his, 40 years of friendship with my grandfather, written into every line of his face, and he said quietly, "Emmalyn, Wrenley, would you like to say a word?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. But my sister, my 15-year-old sister, with her voice as thin as morning frost, stepped forward, and she sang. She sang the third verse of "It Is Well With My Soul," just the third verse. Grandpa's favorite. My peace like a river, my sorrows like sea billows rolling. And when she finished, the 20-odd people who had come to bury a good man cried openly into their handkerchiefs. I still did not cry. I filed that away. I would cry later. I would cry when it was safe. It would not be safe for a very long time. After the service, folks came back to the farmhouse. They brought casseroles. They brought peace. They brought their kindness in glass dishes with masking tape labels that said Emmalyn on the bottom in ballpoint pen. Mrs. Peterson from the feed store hugged me for a long time. Old Mrs. Weatherford, who had taught me piano when I was 8, patted my cheek with her paper-thin hand and whispered, "He was so proud of you girls. You have no idea." I nodded. I wanted to believe her. By 4 o'clock, they were all gone. It was just Wrenley and me. The casseroles were stacked in the refrigerator. The pies were on the counter. And the house was so quiet. I stood in the kitchen a long time. I put my hand on the coffee pot. It was cold. Grandpa had made his last pot in it the morning he died. I had not been able to bring myself to wash it out yet. There was still a ring of coffee stain at the bottom, dark and dried. I stared at that ring, and I thought, this is the moment. This is the moment I am supposed to cry. I waited. Nothing came. Whatever was in me, whatever tears were supposed to be in me, they had been locked away somewhere I could not find the key to. Later that night, I would understand why, but that night I just sat in the dark and I listened to Wrenley moving around upstairs, and I let the house be quiet around me. 3 days after the funeral, they came for the farm. I say they because that is what they were. Not family, not blood, just they. I was standing at this bay window when the black Cadillac Escalade rolled up the gravel drive. 2 people got out, my Uncle Beaumont and his sister, my Aunt Delphine. I had not seen either of them in 11 years. Not since Grandpa's 70th birthday party, when Beaumont had shown up drunk and demanded that Grandpa stop hoarding 40 acres of prime development land like some kind of hillbilly hermit. Grandpa had walked him to the door. Quietly, firmly, and told him not to come back until he learned to speak of his mother's home with respect. Beaumont had not come back. Until now. Now apparently he had come back for good. I called out to my sister without turning from the window. "Wrenley, go upstairs." "Why, just go." "Emmalyn, who is it?" "It's Uncle Beaumont." I heard her intake of breath behind me, small and sharp. She knew that name only from stories. And the stories were not kind. "Go upstairs, honey. Please, let me handle this." She went. I heard her feet on the wooden stairs. I heard her bedroom door click shut. Then I opened the front door before Beaumont could even knock. He was wearing a charcoal suit. His shoes cost more than Grandpa's tractor. His hair was slicked back the way rich men slick their hair when they are pretending to be older than they are. He was 47. He looked 55. Money will do that to a face. Ambition, too. Beside him stood Aunt Delphine. She was smaller than I remembered. Thinner. Her mouth was pinched. She would not meet my eyes. "Emmalyn," Beaumont said, "may we come in?" He did not phrase it as a question. I stepped aside. They walked into the living room like they owned it. Beaumont's eyes swept over the floral sofa where Grandpa used to read the paper, over the wood stove, over the framed photograph of my grandmother above the mantel. I watched him calculate. That is what people like Beaumont do. They walk into a home and they calculate. Square footage, resale value, zoning potential. They do not see the burn mark on the sofa where Grandpa dropped his pipe in 2004. They do not see the height marks on the door frame where Grandpa measured us every birthday until we were 16. They see numbers. That was the first thing I understood about my uncle. He saw numbers where I saw a life. He did not sit. He stood in the middle of the living room with his hands clasped behind his back and he said, "Emmalyn, let me be direct. The estate is insolvent." I said nothing. "Your grandfather," he continued, "was not the businessman he pretended to be. He had a bridge loan against the property. He had unpaid taxes. He had let the water rights lapse on the east pasture. In short, he was drowning." "That's a lie." The words came out of me quiet and flat. Beaumont blinked. "I beg your pardon." I said, "That's a lie. Grandpa paid off the mortgage 5 years ago. He showed me the paperwork. The taxes are current. And the water rights on the east pasture were renewed last April because I drove him to the county office in Hamilton myself." Beaumont smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Sweetheart, your grandfather was 82 years old. He was showing signs of significant cognitive decline in his final months. He signed things. He forgot things. He shuffled paperwork around and told himself pretty stories. It's very common in the elderly. He beat me at chess 2 days before he died. Chess is not finance. He remembered the serial number of a water pump he bought in 1998. Trivia is not finance. He was not confused, Beaumont. He signed power of attorney over to me 6 months ago. It is filed with the county. I have the paperwork in the car. I am the executor of this estate. He let that hang. He let me feel it. The way a man like Beaumont likes to let a girl like me feel a thing. Then he said, "I've been in conversation with Kade Ridge Partners. They are prepared to purchase the property for cash. Full cash offer. Close in 14 days. How modest. Roughly $40,000 each, after fees." I stared at him. $40,000 for a farm my great-grandfather had cleared with his own hands. For an orchard my grandmother had planted the year she married Grandpa. For the porch where I had learned to walk. $40,000. I wanted to laugh. I did not laugh. I said no. Beaumont's smile thinned. "I'm sorry." I said no, we are not selling. "Emmalyn, you do not have the authority to say no. I do." "Then I will find a lawyer." "With what money?" "I'll find one." "With what time?" He glanced at Delphine. Delphine looked at the floor. Then Beaumont turned back to me. And this is where he stopped being an uncle and started being something else, something I did not have a word for yet. He said, "Your sister is 15 years old, Emmalyn. She is a minor. You are her only living family member over the age of 18, but you are not and have never been her legal guardian. That role under Montana law defaults to her nearest competent adult relative, which until a court says otherwise is me." The floor tilted. I felt it tilt. I put my hand on the back of the sofa to steady myself. "You would not." "I don't want to. I truly don't. But if you insist on being difficult about this sale, I will petition the court for temporary custody of Wrenley for her own safety, because a 19-year-old girl who has just dropped out of college cannot be trusted to care for a minor child on a bankrupt farm in the middle of nowhere. Any judge in this state will agree. I could not breathe. You would take her from me. I would place her in a stable environment until you came to your senses. You have not seen her in 11 years. I have not needed to. She is family. She does not know you. She will learn. Behind me, I heard the creak of a floorboard on the upstairs landing. Wrenley. Wrenley had been listening. Of course she had been listening. I closed my eyes. I said very quietly so that only Beaumont could hear, "Get out of this house." He nodded. Once. Then he said in a voice loud enough for my sister to hear, "You have 4 days, Emmalyn. 4 days to have this property vacated of personal effects. Sunday morning at 9 a.m., Mr. Kade and the appraisers will arrive. If the paperwork is not signed by Monday, I will file for temporary custody of Wrenley on Tuesday morning. I am doing this for your family. Please try to understand." He nodded at Delphine. She followed him to the door. At the threshold, she paused. She looked back at me, just once, very briefly, and I saw something in her face that I could not name, something like shame, something like sorrow. Then she was gone. The door closed, the Cadillac rolled down the driveway, and I stood in my grandfather's living room with the smell of his pipe still faintly in the walls, and I understood for the first time in my life what it meant to hate a person. Wrenley came down the stairs slowly, one step, then another, then another. She sat on the second to last step. She wrapped her arms around her knees. She looked so small. She said, "He's going to take me away." "No, he isn't." "Emmalyn," he said. I heard what he said. "Then how?" "I don't know." "Emmalyn, I don't know yet, but he isn't. Do you hear me? He is not." She looked up at me. Her eyes were very gray, like Grandpa's. She said, "I want to pray." I nodded. We had prayed every night together since we were little. Grandpa had taught us. Kneeling at the side of the bed, palms together, eyes closed. Whatever is honest, whatever is lovely, whatever is of good report, think on these things. I had not been able to pray for 7 years, not since my mother died. I had gone through the motions. For Wrenley, for Grandpa, I had knelt. I had folded my hands. I had said amen at the end, but the words had never gone anywhere. They had bounced off the ceiling and come back empty. I knelt beside her on the wooden floor at the bottom of the stairs. She folded her hands. She closed her eyes. She prayed for both of us. I listened. And when she was done, she opened her eyes and looked at me and said, "You didn't say anything." "I know." "Why?" "I don't know how anymore, honey." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Grandpa used to say that when you can't pray, you should just sit and let God pray for you." I did not know what to say to that, so I did not say anything. I just sat with my little sister on the wooden floor of our grandfather's house, and I listened to the rain on the roof, and I let it be quiet. That night, after Wrenley had cried herself to sleep in my bed with her arms around me like she was 5 years old again, I got up. My arm was going numb under her cheek. Her breath had gone soft and even, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw Beaumont's face. That thin, cold smile. That word, custody. I could not sleep, so I got up. I moved slowly. I slid my arm out from under her. She whimpered once, then rolled over into the warm spot where I had been. I pulled the quilt up over her shoulders. I stood there looking at her for a full minute. She looked like my mother. That was a thing I did not usually let myself see. It hurt too much. But standing there in the dark, with her hair fanned out on the pillow and her mouth slightly open, she looked so much like my mother that for a second I could not tell what year it was. I turned away. I went downstairs. I turned on the lamp on Grandpa's roll-top desk, and I began to tear the house apart because Beaumont was lying. The mortgage was paid. I had seen the paperwork with my own eyes. Grandpa had shown it to me one Sunday afternoon in this very room. He had spread it out on the kitchen table and pointed to the notarized stamp and said, "Emmy, this land is free and clear. Nobody takes it from you. Do you hear me?" I heard him. I heard him now in my head, in the middle of the night, in the empty house. Nobody takes it from you. So where was the paperwork? Where was the deed? Where were the bank statements? Where was the tax return? I opened the roll-top desk. I pulled out every drawer. I dumped every folder onto the floor. receipts, utility bills, Farmer's Almanac issues going back to 1987, a photograph of my mother at age 9 riding a pony, a dried corsage from my grandmother's funeral. But no deed. No bank statements, no tax return. I went to the filing cabinet in the hall closet. Empty, just hanging folders. Nothing in them. I went to the attic. I sneezed. I found a box of old Christmas ornaments, a stack of Grandpa's letters to Grandma from when he was in Korea, a quilt my great-grandmother had stitched in 1938. Nothing important. I searched the barn, the tack room, the mud room, the pantry. Nothing. Someone had sterilized this house. I sat down on the floor of the pantry at 3 in the morning, and I put my head in my hands and I thought I lost. Beaumont was going to win. He had the paperwork. He had the money. He had the lawyers. And in 96 hours, my sister was going to be pulled out of this house by a social worker. I don't know how long I sat there, maybe 20 minutes, maybe an hour. Eventually I stood up. My back hurt. My legs were asleep. I walked back to the living room. I intended to go upstairs, to lie down beside my sister, to wait for morning. But on the way, I passed the fireplace mantel, and I stopped. There was a photograph there, in a wooden frame. It had been there my whole life. I had walked past it 10,000 times. It was a picture of Grandpa taken on his 60th birthday. He was standing on the front porch of the farmhouse, holding a 5-year-old me on his shoulders. I was laughing. He was laughing. My hand was tangled in his silver hair. But that night at 3 in the morning, I did not look at Grandpa. I did not look at myself. I looked at the background. Behind the porch, past the yard, past the apple orchard, in the far corner of the frame, half hidden behind the massive weeping willow, there was a small structure, the shed, the corrugated steel shed at the far edge of the property. The one Grandpa had forbidden us from entering our entire lives. I had not thought about that shed in years, but I was thinking about it now. Because Grandpa had told us over and over from the time we were tall enough to walk that the shed was dangerous, rusted, full of tetanus, full of collapsing shelves and rotten wood. Stay out, stay out, stay out. And we had. Even Wrenley, who climbed everything and got into everything, had never once tried to open that shed because Grandpa had asked her not to. But now, standing in the living room at 3 in the morning, I thought about all the other places on that farm that Grandpa had let us go. The hayloft, the silos, the tractor shed, the old machinery barn, the chicken coop that leaned to one side like a drunk man. Grandpa had never cared. He had let us climb everywhere. He had let us break things. He had laughed when Wrenley fell into the water trough and had to be pulled out laughing. The only place he had ever forbidden us to go was the shed, which meant the shed was not dangerous. The shed was hiding something. I climbed the stairs very quietly. I did not want to wake Wrenley. I looked at her, sleeping, Grandpa's flannel jacket on the chair beside the bed. Something in me hardened. Something in me became steel. I whispered, "I'm going to fix this." She did not wake up. I went back downstairs. I went to the kitchen. I pulled Grandpa's Bible off the shelf beside the toaster. He had kept it there, not in the living room, not on a bookshelf, in the kitchen beside the toaster, because he read it every morning while the coffee was brewing. It was the most used book in the house. I did not know why I was picking it up now. I just picked it up. I sat down at the kitchen table. I opened the Bible, and a piece of paper fell out. It was folded in half. A single sheet, yellow legal pad paper, Grandpa's handwriting, sharp cursive, blue ink, at the top 3 words. For my girls. My hands started to shake. I unfolded it. Emmalyn, Wrenley, if you are reading this, I have gone home. Do not weep for me. I have lived a long, good life, and I am with your grandmother and your mother now. There are things I did not tell you, things I wanted to tell you, things I could not tell you while I was alive, because to speak of them was to endanger you both. Now that I am gone, they are no longer secret, they are yours. In this Bible, in the back cover behind the end paper, you will find a small object. Take it. Ephesians 5:11. Read it. Then do what it says. And Emmalyn, my darling girl, the shed is not what I told you it was. It has never been what I told you it was. Take your sister. Go at dawn. Go together. And forgive me for the years I let you think it was dangerous. I love you both more than I have words to say. Grandpa. I sat at the table with that letter in my hands, and for a long minute the world stopped. I turned the Bible over. I opened the back cover. I ran my fingers along the end paper. It was slightly loose, slightly puckered, as if it had been carefully sliced with a razor blade and just as carefully glued back down. I peeled it away. Behind the end paper, tucked into a small, handmade pocket, was a black plastic object no larger than a matchbook, a digital audio recorder. The little red LED on the side was still blinking faintly. Grandpa had been recording something for a long time. I plugged it into the old laptop on Grandpa's desk, the one he used for tax software once a year and nothing else. The recorder had 11 audio files on it. The oldest was dated April 14th, nearly 6 months before Grandpa's death. I clicked on the oldest one. Grandpa's voice came through the tinny laptop speakers. Warm, deep, familiar. I was talking to someone, and that someone was Beaumont. Dad, I really do think we need to talk about the future. I've told you my thoughts on the future, son. You're not being realistic. The land is a burden. I've farmed this land for 60 years. It has not broken me yet. You need to sign the power of attorney I brought. It's not a sale. It's just so I can help you manage things if your health goes. A pause, a long pause, and then my grandfather's voice, slower, softer, a little confused. I don't know, Beaumont. I get so tired these days. I forget things. Just yesterday, I couldn't remember where I put my glasses. That's exactly what I mean, Dad. Let me help you. Where do I sign? I sat back in the chair. I stopped breathing because I knew that voice, that slow, soft, confused voice. That was not my grandfather. That was my grandfather pretending. That was my grandfather sharp as a razor. 70 years of chess and law of Montana and Farmer's Almanac in his head, pretending to be a foggy old man for the benefit of his son. I clicked through the next files, 6 months of them. My grandfather quietly, patiently letting his own son believe he was going senile, so that his own son would show his hand, so that his own son would say too much, which he did. By the 8th file, Beaumont was on the phone in my grandfather's kitchen, not knowing he was being recorded, saying things like, "Once he signs the sale, we split it 3 ways. Delphine will do whatever I tell her. The girls get nothing. It's all handled Preston. Kade Ridge is going to get the whole parcel by Thanksgiving." Preston. Preston Kade. Kade Ridge Partners. Beaumont had been paid in advance to sell my grandfather's farm to the same developer whose company was named after him. Grandpa had known. Grandpa had known for 6 months. I put my face in my hands. I did not cry, but my whole body shook. And I sat there at his desk in the middle of the night, and I understood. He had not been dying quietly. He had been fighting. The whole time, he had been fighting for us. And now he was handing me the sword. I opened Ephesians 5:11 in his Bible. He had underlined it. Blue ink, sharp lines, the same pen as the letter. "Have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them." Below it in margin, in the same sharp handwriting, 3 lines. "The shed, at dawn, do not go alone." I sat with the Bible open for a long time. Old men are supposed to fade. My grandfather had not faded. He had gotten quieter and sharper and more patient than the man who was trying to destroy him could ever imagine. I closed the Bible. I looked at the clock above the stove. It was 4:47 in the morning. Dawn came late this time of year in Montana. Almost 7:30. I had 2.5 hours. I went to the mudroom. I found Grandpa's heavy iron bolt cutters. I took them down. They were heavier than I remembered. I found 2 flashlights, batteries. I went back upstairs. I put my hand on Wrenley's shoulder. "Wren, honey." She stirred. She squinted at me. "Emmy, what time is it?" "It's early. Get dressed. Warm clothes, boots." "Why?" "We're going to the shed." She sat up so fast the quilt fell off her shoulders. "What?" "Left us something. I don't know what, but he left us something, and we have to go before Beaumont comes back." She was quiet for one heartbeat. Then she said, "Okay, just that, just okay." She got out of bed. She pulled on jeans, a sweater, wool socks, Grandpa's flannel jacket over the top of everything. I watched her. She was 15 years old. She was ready to walk into the dark with me because I asked her to. And in that moment, standing in the doorway of her bedroom at 5 in the morning, I made a promise to my grandfather. Not out loud, just in my chest. I said I will not lose her. Then I picked up the flashlight, and my sister picked up the second flashlight, and we walked down the stairs together. The rain had stopped sometime in the small hours. A thick ground fog had rolled up out of the river bottom and was clinging to the pastures like something alive. The wet grass soaked through my boots within 10 steps. My breath came out in white plumes. Wrenley walked beside me. She had Grandpa's Bible tucked under her arm. She had not asked why she was bringing it. She had just picked it up off the kitchen table on the way out, and I had not asked her to explain. We walked through the mudroom door, across the back porch, down the porch steps, across the yard. The apple orchard was to our left, bare branches, skeletal in the fog. The old barn was to our right. The tractor was parked under the lean-to. We walked past the barn, through the gate, into the back pasture. The shed was at the far corner of the property, nearly a quarter-mile from the house, set against the tree line where the wild land began. We walked in silence. The only sound was our boots in the wet grass, and once the distant call of a red-tailed hawk, high, far, circling. The fog got thicker the closer we came to the tree line. Then suddenly out of the fog, the shed appeared. I stopped. I put my hand on my sister's arm. She stopped too. The shed was exactly as I remembered it. Corrugated steel rusted to a violent orange, roof sagging under decades of moss. Single window boarded over from the inside with rotting cedar planks. It looked like it had been abandoned in 1962 and forgotten. But on the front, on the sliding metal door, bolted through the hasp, was a padlock. A brand new padlock. Heavy black steel, shiny, expensive. The kind of padlock a man buys when he is protecting something that matters more to him than his own life. Not a speck of rust. Not one. Wrenley whispered, "Emmy, I know. That lock is new. I know. Grandpa put that on there. I know he did." She looked at me. Her breath was making white clouds in front of her face. She said, "What did he leave us?" "I don't know. Emmy, what did he leave us?" "I don't know, honey, but whatever it is, it was worth more to him than a $200 lock on a shed he told us was full of tetanus." I lifted the bolt cutters. I set the jaws around the shackle of the padlock. I leaned my whole body onto the handles. The first attempt, the handles slipped. My palms were slick with the cold sweat. I reset my grip. Wrenley stepped in behind me and put her hands on top of mine. "On three," she whispered. 1, 2, 3. We threw our weight onto the handles. The steel groaned, the shackle bent, the shackle snapped. The padlock fell into the mud with a heavy, dull thump. Wrenley picked it up, turned it over in her hand, handed it to me. She said, "Grandpa was hiding something big." "Yes." "Should we be scared?" I thought about it. I thought about it seriously. Then I said, "No. Whatever is in there, he left it for us. He wanted us to have it. That means it's ours. And we don't have to be scared of what's ours." She nodded. I gripped the handle of the sliding metal door. I planted my boot against the frame and I hauled backwards with both hands. Wrenley grabbed the edge and pulled with me. The door began to slide. With a horrible metal-on-metal screech that sent a flock of crows exploding out of the willow tree behind us, the door slid open, just enough for two thin girls to squeeze through. We stopped at the threshold. I clicked on my flashlight. The beam cut into the darkness of the shed. At first glance, it was exactly what Grandpa had always told us it was. A junkyard, stacks of dry rotted tires, rusted lawnmower engines, boxes spilling with bent nails and oxidized pipe fittings, cobwebs thick as curtains. I stepped inside. Wrenley followed. Our flashlight beams swept the interior. The air was cold, dry. It smelled like old motor oil and dust and something else, something faintly metallic. I moved my beam slowly across the floor, and I saw it. Down the center of the shed, cutting between the towers of junk, was a narrow path. Scuff marks, drag marks, very faint, but unmistakable. Someone had been walking through this shed back and forth for a long time. Someone had been moving things. I followed the drag marks with my flashlight. They led to the back left corner of the shed, to a canvas tarp, heavy, dust-caked, draped over what looked like a low mound of wooden shipping crates. I looked at my sister. She looked at me. Her free hand was clutching Grandpa's Bible against her chest. I said very quietly, Whatever's under that tarp, it's the thing he was hiding. She nodded. I walked forward. She followed. I reached the tarp. I gripped the corner, and I pulled. The tarp slid off in a great heavy sigh, and a cloud of dust rose up into our flashlight beams. I coughed. Wrenley coughed. We both stepped back. The dust settled, and I saw. It was not a mound of crates. It was a wooden platform, thick oak planks, fitted together tight, sitting flush against the concrete floor of the shed. In the exact center of the platform, set into a recessed brass ring, a pull. Wrenley whispered one word, Emmy. I could not answer her. I dropped to my knees. I set the flashlight on a nearby bucket. I wrapped both my hands around the coal brass. I pulled. The platform did not move. I pulled harder. It did not move. Wrenley knelt beside me, wordless. She wedged her small hands next to mine. And on the count of three, she did not have to say out loud, we pulled together. The platform groaned, the platform lifted, because it was not a platform, it was a door. And beneath the door was a staircase. Concrete, poured, smooth, descending straight down into perfect black. A rush of cool, dry air came up out of the hole. Not damp, not moldy, not the smell of a root cellar or a crawl space. This air smelled like a machine shop, like leather, like oil, like something clean and cared for. I looked at my sister. She looked at me. Her lips moved. She said, "Was this here the whole time?" I said, "The whole time." She said, "Grandpa built this." I said, "Grandpa built this." And there, in the dark, on our knees, above a hole in the ground that had no business existing under a shed, our grandfather had told us was full of tetanus. We started to laugh, not because it was funny, because there was nowhere else for it to go. The fear, the grief, the weight of the last 4 days. It came out of us as a strange, broken laugh, and we clung to each other, and then just as suddenly we were not laughing anymore. We were quiet again. I picked up my flashlight. I pointed it down the stairs. The beam did not reach the bottom. I said, "Stay behind me." She said, "I'm right here." I took the first step. Concrete, cold, solid. I took the second. I ran my free hand along the wall, bare metal, painted gray, and running down the wall beside a metal handrail. A thick electrical conduit, modern, plastic sheathing, new. Halfway down the stairwell, my hand found what I was looking for. A switch, a smooth plastic switch plate. I flicked it. Somewhere deep in the dark below, a heavy mechanical hum began. Then one after another, in a slow, sweeping wave, industrial fluorescent lights came on, buzzing, bright, bright, brighter, until the whole room below us was flooded in white light, and Wrenley made a sound I will never in my life forget. A small, choked sound, half a gasp, half a sob, half a laugh. We stood on the stairs and we looked down, and down, and down. It was not a cellar, it was a bunker. The staircase descended maybe 20 feet below the surface of the earth, and it opened into a room that was easily 40 feet long and 25 feet wide. Bigger than the shed above it, much bigger. Reinforced steel walls, poured concrete floor coated in high-gloss gray epoxy that reflected the light like water. An industrial dehumidifier hummed quietly in one corner. The whole space smelled dry, cool, preserved, like a museum room where they keep the old flags. But that was not what made my sister sob. What made my sister sob were the cars, 4 of them, parked in a perfect line down the center of the room, gleaming under the fluorescent lights, as if they had rolled off the assembly line yesterday. I did not know cars, but even I knew 3 of them were the same shape. Low, fierce, aggressive, side exit exhaust pipes, wide tires, silver snake emblems on the fenders, one deep sapphire blue, one blood red, one British racing green. Shelby Cobras, and the 4th, set apart, elevated on some kind of hydraulic lift at the back of the room. A massive black machine, easily 20 feet long. Sweeping chrome fenders, wire spoke wheels, a hood that seemed to go on forever. I did not know its name yet. I would learn it later. A Duesenberg Model J. We stood on the stairs and we could not move. Wrenley whispered, "Are they real?" I said, "I think so." "But how?" "I don't know." "How?" "I don't know." She started down the stairs before I did. Bible clutched to her chest with one arm, flashlight forgotten and dangling from her other hand. She reached the bottom. She walked out onto the epoxy floor. She stopped 10 feet from the Blue Cobra and just stood there. I followed. I did not touch the cars. They looked like the kind of thing that would set off an alarm if you breathe on them. And more than that, they looked like they belonged to somebody else. Somebody rich, somebody far away. Not to me, not to my sister, not to the family that ate elbow macaroni on Wednesday nights. Wrenley finally spoke. Grandpa had these under our farm. Yes, Grandpa, our grandpa, Silas, had these under our farm. Yes, Emmy, I know. I walked past her, past the Blue Cobra, past the red one, past the green one, and that was when I saw the wall, the back wall of the bunker. Behind the big black car on its lift, a whole wall, 20 feet wide, steel bulkhead, and bolted to it from waist height all the way up to the ceiling. A corkboard, the biggest corkboard I had ever seen, covered in documents, photographs, bank statements, newspaper clippings, handwritten note cards, manila folders pinned open, legal forms with sections highlighted in yellow, and running from one document to the next, connecting them, weaving them together in a spiderweb that had to have taken hundreds of hours to build. Red string. At the very center of the corkboard at eye level was an 8 by 10 glossy photograph. I walked toward it. My legs felt very far away. It was a photograph of my Uncle Beaumont, shaking hands with another man, in front of a glass office building, both of them smiling, both of them in expensive suits. I did not need the caption to know who the other man was. Preston Kade, CEO of Kade Ridge Partners, above the photograph, pinned to the corkboard on a yellow index card, in my grandfather's sharp cursive. 2 words, the inheritance. Below it, in smaller writing, also in Grandpa's hand, for Emmalyn and Wrenley. When it is time, everything you need is here, Grandpa. Wrenley came up beside me. I felt her hand slide into mine. We stood in front of the corkboard, under the buzzing fluorescence, underneath the earth of the pasture we had grown up on, and I finally cried. It happened all at once, like a dam letting go. I did not sob. I did not make noise. The tears just came out of me in one long, silent wave, and I could not have stopped them if my life depended on it. They went down my face and off my chin and into the collar of my coat. Wrenley did not say anything. She just held my hand. She let me cry. She had been waiting 4 days for it. I let it happen. And when it was done and I could breathe again, I wiped my face on my sleeve, and I turned to my sister and I said one thing. He believed we could do this. She said, yes, Emmy. I said, then we can. I moved along the corkboard. I read for 2 hours. Wrenley read beside me. Where she did not understand something, I explained it. Where I did not understand something, she asked a question that helped me understand it. And this is what we learned. Number 1, the mortgage was paid. Grandpa had the original release from the bank pinned to the board notarized dated 2/20, 5 years ago. There was no lien on this property. There had never been a lien on this property. Beaumont had made up the bridge loan out of thin air. Number 2, the taxes were current. Every single year going back to 1978 was there. Every single stamped receipt from the Ravalli County Treasurer's Office. Number 3, the water rights on the East Pasture had not lapsed. They had been transferred, illegally, in April of this year, by someone using a forged signature that looked on quick glance like my grandfather's. A private hydrology firm had been paid in cash from an offshore account to file paperwork that reassigned the East Pasture's water allotment to a shell entity. The shell entity's name was BRH Consulting, registered in the Cayman Islands. Sole beneficial owner listed as 1, Beaumont R. Hollister. Wire transfer records, my hands started shaking as I read them, showed $1.4 million over the past 3 years. Paid by Kade Ridge Partners. Paid to slowly destroy this farm. Paid to poison its water. Paid to lapse its permits on purpose. Paid to falsify debts. Paid to manufacture a financial collapse. So that when the old man died, the property would look like it was worth pennies on the dollar. And Kade Ridge would swoop in, and Beaumont would take his cut, and the girls would get nothing, just like he had told Preston Kade on the phone in that 8th audio file. Wrenley put her forehead against my shoulder. She said he did this to Grandpa on purpose. Yes. He starved his own father's farm on purpose. Yes, honey. He was going to let Grandpa die and then take everything. Yes. He is our uncle. I know. She was quiet. Then she said, I don't understand how a person becomes that. I did not have an answer for her. I kept reading. Number 4, the power of attorney was forged. Grandpa had hired a private handwriting analyst out of Missoula, a retired FBI documents examiner. There was a 9-page forensic report pinned to the corkboard. The report concluded in language so clear it sounded like a slap that the signature purporting to belong to Silas Hollister on the reference power of attorney document is not in this examiner's professional opinion authored by Silas Hollister. The signature exhibits characteristics consistent with a competent forgery, likely produced by tracing from an authentic exemplar. Beaumont had traced Grandpa's signature. Off a Christmas card maybe, off an old check. Number 5. There was a business card pinned to the very bottom right corner of the corkboard. Cream-colored, embossed, United States Attorney's Office, District of Montana, Nathaniel Prewitt, Assistant United States Attorney, direct line, handwritten on the back of the card in Grandpa's blue ink. Emmalyn, call this man when you find this room, not before he is expecting you. He is a good man. Trust him. I stared at that card. Wrenley said federal. Yes. He was going to make it federal. Yes. I unpinned the card. I put it in my pocket. And then I turned to the workbench that sat below the corkboard. Heavy steel, bolted to the concrete floor. On the workbench were 2 objects. The first was a thick, black, leather-bound ledger, about the size of a large family Bible. Heavy, solid, used enough not to be dusty, worn enough to have been used. The second was a sealed white envelope. The envelope had our names on it, Emmalyn and Wrenley, in Grandpa's handwriting. Wrenley whispered, should we open it? He left it for us. Are you ready? No, neither am I. But we're going to. I picked it up. The wax seal cracked under my thumb. I unfolded a single sheet of heavy stationery. I read it to her out loud, because I could not read it silently. My grandfather deserved to be heard. My dearest girls, if you are reading this, I am gone. And Beaumont has undoubtedly shown his fangs. I'm sorry I kept this room a secret from you for so long. I did not enjoy the pretending, the old fool act. Every time I sat across from Beaumont and pretended to be a man, half my mind, my heart broke a little, but I could not think of another way to catch him. The cars in this room are a very long story. I will tell you the beginning of that story here, and the rest of it you will find in the ledger. Because that is how a legacy works. It is a story that is not finished when the storyteller dies. It is a story that the next generation has to keep writing, or it stops. The cars are not stolen. They are not smuggled. They are not part of anything shameful. They were owned by my father, your great-grandfather, Elias Hollister, and by a debt of honor I made with him when I was 18 years old, they became mine. And now by that same debt, they become yours. The cars are legally held in a blind trust administered by an attorney in Missoula whose name and address are in the ledger. You are the sole beneficiaries. The trust is entirely separate from the farm and from the probate of my estate. Beaumont cannot touch it. He does not even know it exists. The cars are worth at conservative auction estimates somewhere between $38 and $45 million. I stopped reading. Wrenley did not move. I read that sentence again. To myself, $38 and $45 million. I put the letter down. I sat down on the concrete floor. I put my head between my knees. Wrenley sat down beside me. Eventually she said, is that a real number? I said, yes. Is that our number now? Yes. Me. I know. That is more money than the entire town. I know. I picked the letter back up. I kept reading. But girls, the money is not the point. The money has never been the point. The money is a tool, and a tool is only as good as the hand that uses it. What matters is what is on that corkboard. What matters is that ledger. What matters is the phone call to Mr. Prewitt. Beaumont must be stopped, not because he wounded me, but because if he is not stopped, he will do to some other family what he tried to do to ours. Men like Beaumont do not stop by themselves. They stop only when someone makes them stop. You are going to be that someone, both of you. Take the ledger to Nathaniel Prewitt. Do not warn Beaumont. Do not hesitate. Let the law do its work. When it is done, then and only then you may think about mercy. I love you both more than the world. Defend our home. Grandpa. I folded the letter. I put it in my coat pocket. I stood up. I looked at my sister. She was sitting on the concrete floor of a bunker with a Bible in her lap and $40 million worth of cars behind her, and her cheeks were streaked with dust and tears. She said, "What do we do?" I said, "We go home. We call the lawyer in Missoula. Then we call Mr. Prewitt. Then we sleep for 1 hour. Then we come back down here in the morning and we photograph every single piece of paper on that corkboard and we scan every single page of that ledger and we make 3 copies of every month." She said, "Yes, okay, yes." I said, "Wren." She said, "What?" I said, "You did this." She said, "What?" I said, "You picked up the Bible on the way out of the kitchen. You did that. If we hadn't bought that Bible, I would not have opened Ephesians, and I would not have understood Grandpa's letter." She looked at me. She said very quietly, "Grandpa told me to bring it." "What?" "Grandpa told me to bring it. In the kitchen, I heard him." "Wrenley, I know how that sounds." "Wrenley, I don't care. I heard him as clear as anything." I did not know what to say to that. I did not know if she was making it up because she was tired and terrified. I did not know if it was the kind of thing a mind does to survive. But I looked at my little sister, sitting on the floor of a bunker that should not exist, beside a wall of evidence that our grandfather had built with his own hands during the last 6 months of his life. And I thought, maybe she really did hear him. I did not tell her that. I just squeezed her hand. I said, "Come on, let's go home." We climbed the stairs. We closed the trap door. We dragged the tarp back over it. We slid the metal door shut. We wound a piece of baling wire through the hasp just to close it. It looked from the outside like nothing had ever happened. We walked back across the pasture in the growing morning light. The fog was starting to lift. The sun was breaking through the trees on the eastern ridge. Halfway back to the house without looking at me, Wrenley said, "I don't want to give up the farm." I said, "We're not going to." She said, "I don't want to give up the cars either." I said, "We won't have to." She said, "If we sell them, we should give some of the money away." I stopped walking. I looked at her. She had said it so plainly, like it was already decided, like it had been decided a long time ago by someone older and wiser than either of us. I said, "Yes, we should." She said, "Grandpa would want that." I said, "Yes, he would." We walked the rest of the way. We went in through the mudroom. We put the kettle on. While the water heated, I called the attorney in Missoula. I got a voicemail. I left my name and my grandfather's name and a phone number. 6 minutes later, my phone rang. The attorney's voice was old and calm and warm. He said, "Emmalyn, your grandfather told me you would call. Not this soon, but he did tell me you would call." I said, "Sir, there is a lot happening." He said, "I imagine there is." I said, "I need to know if what my grandfather wrote in his letter is true." He said, "Which part?" I said, "The part about the trust." He said, "Yes, that is true. The trust exists. It has existed since 1998. Your grandfather designated you and your sister as sole beneficiaries the year Wrenley was born. As of the last update in July of this year, the appraised value was $39.7 million. Insured, titled, documented, legal, untouchable." I said, "Sir." He said, "Yes." I said, "There is a man named Beaumont trying to sell our farm." He said, "I am aware of Beaumont." I said, "Do you know Nathaniel Prewitt?" There was a pause. The attorney's voice when it came back was quieter. He said, "I know Nathaniel very well. Your grandfather and I have both been in touch with him for the past year and a half." He said, "Emmalyn, listen to me. Your grandfather did not leave this to chance. He built this from the ground up, piece by piece. He knew what he was leaving you, and he knew he was leaving you enough. Do you understand what I mean when I say he left you enough?" I said, "I think so." He said, "Good." He gave me instructions, simple ones. Where to bring the ledger, which files to photograph first, what to say to Beaumont if Beaumont called me before Sunday, which is to say nothing at all and hang up. I wrote every word down on the back of a farmer's almanac. He said, "One more thing, Emmalyn." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "There is a man named Halloran in Hamilton. He served as your grandfather's estate attorney for 22 years. I said, "I know Mr. Halloran. He has been to Sunday supper. He came to Grandpa's funeral. The attorney was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Emmalyn, do not go to Mr. Halloran with any of this. Do not go to him with anything. Do not accept a phone call from him if he calls you first. My throat went dry. I said, sir? He said, your grandfather had suspicions? I said, suspicions of what? He said that Mr. Halloran was not entirely on his side anymore. I said, but Grandpa trusted him. He said Grandpa trusted him for many years, and then he stopped. Please, believe me on this. Do not contact Halloran. I nodded, even though he could not see me nod. I said, okay. He said, good girl, call me when Prewitt calls you back. And he hung up. I sat at the kitchen table. Wrenley was watching me from the stove. The kettle had started to whistle. She turned it off. I said, the lawyer says not to talk to Mr. Halloran. She said, why? I said, Grandpa didn't trust him at the end. She said, Mr. Halloran was at the funeral. He hugged me. I said, I know, honey. She said, I don't like this. I said, neither do I. We drank the tea in silence. Then I made the call to Prewitt. He picked up on the second ring. I introduced myself. He was quiet for one heartbeat. Then he said in a voice that was gentler than I expected from a federal prosecutor, Miss Hollister, I have been waiting for this call for 4 days. I am so very sorry about your grandfather. He was one of the best men I have ever worked with. I said, thank you. He said, tell me everything. I did. When I was done, there was a long pause. Then he said, Emmalyn, your grandfather was building this case with me for over a year. What you have described to me are the final pieces. He said, I am flying to Missoula tomorrow morning. He said, I am going to bring 2 agents and a warrant. He said, and I am going to be at your house on Sunday morning before 9 a.m. He said, either way, this ends this Sunday. He said, do you have a place to hide the ledger and the audio recorder until then? I said, yes. He said, do not tell me where. He said, one more thing. I said, yes, sir. He said, do not let your sister out of your sight, not for 1 second. If Beaumont's plan starts to fall apart, he may escalate the custody threat. He may already have paperwork drafted. I said, I hear you. He hung up. I put the phone down. I looked at Wrenley. She was sitting across from me with a mug of tea in her small hands, her hair uncombed. I said, you don't leave my sight until Sunday. She said, okay. She said, can we sleep now? I said, yes. We slept. We slept from 11 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon, side by side in my bed with the phone under my pillow. I woke to the sound of a car door slamming in the driveway. I sat straight up. I looked out the window. There was a white minivan parked in the drive. A woman was walking toward the porch, late 30s, blonde ponytail, beige cardigan, a leather portfolio under her arm. Behind her, still standing beside the minivan, was a man in a dark uniform. Sheriff's deputy. I felt something cold slide down my back. I looked at the clock. It was 4:07 p.m. on Thursday. Beaumont had said Sunday. Beaumont had said we had until Sunday. Beaumont had lied. The woman with the portfolio climbed the porch steps. She knocked on the door. 3 sharp knocks. Then she called out in a voice that was practiced friendly. Miss Hollister, it's Barbara Whitaker with Ravalli County Child and Family Services. I need to speak with you, please. Behind me, Wrenley made a sound. I turned. She was awake, sitting up in the bed. Her face was white. She whispered, Emmy. I whispered, get in the closet, now, and do not make a sound, no matter what you hear. She was crying instantly, silently, but she got up and she got in the closet. I closed the closet door. I walked down the stairs. Halfway down, I stopped at the roll-top desk. I opened the top drawer. I took out the digital audio recorder. I clicked it on. I set it to record. I slipped it into the front pocket of my jeans. Then I walked to the front door. I put my hand on the knob. I took one breath. I opened the door. The woman on the porch smiled at me the way people smile at you when they have already decided what they are going to do to you. She said, Emmalyn Hollister. I said, yes. She said, I've received a formal complaint filed this morning regarding the welfare of your minor sister, Wrenley Hollister. She held up a folded document. She said, I'm going to need to speak with her. Right now, please. I stood in the doorway with Barbara Whitaker looking up at me from the porch and the sheriff's deputy standing beside the minivan with his hand resting on his belt, and the whole world narrowed down to a single point. I said, may I see the paperwork, please? She said, of course, here. She handed me the folded document. I did not look at it. I said, ma'am, before we go any further, I want you to know that I am recording this conversation. Montana is a one-party consent state. I am the one party. This is legal. Barbara Whitaker's smile faltered. Just a hair. She said, that's fine. That's within your rights. I said, thank you. I unfolded the document. It was a temporary emergency removal order, issued that morning by a judge in Ravalli County based on an anonymous tip that a 15-year-old girl was living in unsafe conditions on a bankrupt farm with a 19-year-old sister who was unfit to care for her. The complaint had been filed at 8:47 that morning. Beaumont had been in my living room at 9 a.m. the day before, telling me I had until Sunday. He had filed the complaint before he even came to see me. He had come to my grandfather's living room already knowing he was going to have my sister taken away. Something inside me went very quiet. I said, ma'am, before you come into this house, I would like to make one phone call to Assistant United States Attorney Nathaniel Prewitt with the District of Montana. She said, Miss Hollister, that is not how this works. I said, he has requested that I contact him immediately in the event of any activity like this at this residence. She stared at me. Her jaw came slightly unhinged. She said, I'm sorry, what? I said, Nathaniel Prewitt, Assistant United States Attorney. He is currently supervising a federal investigation into the individual who filed the complaint you are holding in your hand. The deputy stepped closer to the porch. Barbara Whitaker looked at him. He looked back at her. Neither of them said anything for a full 4 seconds. I said, I am happy to place the call on speaker. She said in a voice that had lost every ounce of its practiced friendly, yes, that would be acceptable. I stepped back into the house. I did not invite her in. I took my phone out of my pocket. I dialed Prewitt. He picked up on the first ring. I said, sir, I have a caseworker from Ravalli County Child and Family Services on my front porch with a sheriff's deputy. She has an emergency removal order. She wants to take Wrenley. Prewitt did not miss a beat. He said, put me on speaker. I put him on speaker. He said, ma'am, can you hear me? Barbara Whitaker leaned toward the phone. She said, yes. This is Barbara Whitaker with Ravalli County. He said, my name is Nathaniel Prewitt. I am an Assistant United States Attorney with the District of Montana. I want to be very clear with you about something. The complaint you are executing today was filed by an individual who is the subject of an active federal investigation for wire fraud, forgery, and racketeering. In other words, ma'am, the complaint you are holding was filed by the abuser, not against him. Silence on the porch. He said the girl inside that house is not just a minor. She is a material witness in an active federal investigation, and her removal at this hour is going to be reviewed under a magnifying glass by the U.S. Attorney's Office, by the state judiciary, and ma'am, by the press. I watched the color leave Barbara Whitaker's face. Prewitt said, ma'am, I am asking you to make one phone call to your supervisor and ask if there is any margin in this order to postpone execution by 12 hours, just 12 hours, until I arrive. She said very quietly, I would need to call my director. He said, please do. She dialed. She stepped off the porch to make the call. The deputy stayed. He did not look at me. He looked at the porch boards. 22 minutes. That is how long the caseworker was on the phone with her director. And her director was on the phone with Prewitt. And Prewitt was on the phone with the U.S. Attorney's Office in Great Falls. And somewhere in the middle of that chain of phone calls, a magistrate judge in Missoula was pulled out of dinner to sign an amended order postponing the emergency removal of one Wrenley Hollister for a period of 24 hours, pending federal review. At the end of the 22 minutes, Barbara Whitaker came back up onto the porch. She said, Miss Hollister. I said, yes, ma'am. She said, I have been instructed to postpone execution of this order pending a review tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. in Missoula. I said, thank you. She said, Miss Hollister, I am going to say something, and you did not hear me say it. Do you understand? I said, yes, ma'am. She said, whoever filed this complaint, I hope they bury him. She turned. She walked down the porch steps. She got into the minivan. The deputy tipped his hat at me, just barely, and they were gone. I closed the door. I locked it. I stood in the front hall for exactly 5 seconds. Then I ran upstairs and I opened the closet door and my sister fell into my arms. She was shaking so hard I could feel her teeth chattering. I did not tell her it was okay. I just held her. Somewhere in the middle of that hold, I cried again. The dam had broken. There was no more locking it back up. I cried into my little sister's hair, and she cried into my collarbone. That night I did not sleep. I sat in the rocking chair beside Wrenley's bed. I watched her chest rise and fall. Grandpa's Bible was open on my knee. I did not read it. I could not focus on words. I just kept it there because it was a solid thing, and I needed solid things. At 3:14 in the morning, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text message from an unknown number, just 3 words. You will lose. I stared at it. I did not respond. I forwarded it to Prewitt. He responded within a minute. Delete it from your phone. Screenshot first. Send screenshot to me. Then delete. Do not respond. I did what he said. Then I sat in the dark and watched my sister sleep until the sun came up. At 7:52 a.m. on Friday, Nathaniel Prewitt pulled into our driveway in a black government sedan. He was not alone. Behind him was a second sedan, and behind that a plain white utility van. 6 people got out. Prewitt himself, 2 FBI agents in blazers, a woman in a gray pantsuit from the U.S. Attorney's Office, and 2 forensic technicians who unloaded a truly staggering amount of camera equipment from the back of the van. Prewitt walked up to me on the porch. He was in his mid-50s, silver-haired, gray eyes that were kind and tired at the same time. He wore a dark suit and boots. He shook my hand. He said, Emmalyn. I said, sir. He said, your grandfather told me about you 2 years ago. He said, she's the one who'll do it if I'm not around to finish it. He said he was right. I could not speak. He turned. He said, where's your sister? I said, inside at the kitchen table. He said, bring her out. I need her to hear this too. I brought Wrenley out. She was still with the Bible under her arm. Prewitt crouched a little so he was eye level with her. He said, Miss Wrenley. She said, sir. He said, I want you to know something. Your grandfather told me you were the reason he was going to finish this. He said, Nate, I've got a 15-year-old granddaughter who still believes people can be good. I am not going to let my son break that. He said, you keep believing that. Do you hear me? She could not speak either. He straightened up. He looked back at me. He said, show us the shed. We showed him. The 2 forensic technicians spent the next 6 hours in the bunker. They photographed every document on the corkboard. They scanned every page of the ledger. They boxed and cataloged every audio file from Grandpa's recorder. While they worked, Prewitt sat at our kitchen table with me and Wrenley. He drank 3 cups of coffee. He walked us through what was going to happen on Sunday. He said, Beaumont and Preston Kade are coming here Sunday morning at 9 a.m. to conduct a final walkthrough. They are also based on intelligence we have received planning to be accompanied by attorney Terrence Halloran of Halloran and Associates in Hamilton. Wrenley's head came up sharply. Prewitt saw it. He said, yes, Halloran, your grandfather's attorney of 22 years. He said, I regret to inform you that Mr. Halloran has been on Beaumont's payroll for approximately 18 months. He drafted the forged power of attorney. He filed it with the county clerk. He instructed Beaumont on how to structure the BRH Consulting shell in the Cayman Islands. He is going to be arrested at the same moment Beaumont is arrested. Wrenley put her hand over her mouth. I said, he was at Grandpa's funeral. Prewitt said, I know. And he stood there, and he shook your hand, and he told you he was sorry. I said, he held my sister while she cried. Prewitt said, I know, and you are going to see him in handcuffs on Sunday morning. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, girls, there is one more thing. He opened his briefcase. He set on the table a document, sealed with a red court seal, signed by a federal magistrate. He said, this is an emergency injunction, signed at 7 this morning. It permanently vacates the state emergency removal order concerning Wrenley. It designates Wrenley as a federally protected material witness, and it names Emmalyn as her temporary custodian pending a full guardianship hearing that we have scheduled for 6 weeks from now. That hearing is a formality. Your custody, Emmalyn, is a foregone conclusion. He slid the document across the table. He said, Beaumont's last card is gone. I said, yes, sir. He said, he can't take her from you. He never could. He was bluffing. Wrenley reached across the table. She put her hand on the document. She held it there. She said, sir. He said, yes. She said, my grandfather. Do you think he is watching? Prewitt was quiet. Then he said, yes, I do. She said, thank you. Saturday was the longest and shortest day of my life. We did not do much. Prewitt had told us to stay inside. Two plainclothes deputies parked in an unmarked pickup at the top of the driveway. Just in case. I made pancakes. Wrenley ate 3. We watched an old movie. I could not tell you which one. I braided Wrenley's hair while she sat on the porch swing. She said, "Emmy." I said, "Yeah." She said, "When this is over." I said, "Yeah." She said, "Will you go back to college?" I said, "I don't know yet." She said, "You should. You wanted to be a veterinarian." I said, "That was a long time ago." She said, "It was 1 year ago." I said, "I know." She was quiet. Then she said, "Grandpa wanted you to." I said, "I know he did." She said, "You should." I braided the rest of her hair. I did not answer her, but I heard her. I heard my little sister. Sunday morning came slow, a hard, bright blue sky, frost on the pasture, the kind of morning where the whole world looks scrubbed clean. At 6:30 a.m., Prewitt and his team arrived. 10 people, 2 FBI agents, 2 state troopers, 2 deputies, 2 prosecutors, Prewitt himself, and a woman in an unmarked windbreaker whose only role was to keep a hand near her holster the whole time. They parked their vehicles behind the old machinery barn. Out of sight, they took up positions, 2 by the barn, 2 by the porch, 2 inside the mudroom, 2 inside the front hall, Prewitt in the kitchen. At 7:45 a.m. I made coffee. I put out cream and sugar. I set 2 cups on the porch railing, like nothing was wrong, like it was any other Sunday morning. At 8:52 a.m. I heard tires on gravel. Wrenley was sitting on the porch swing beside me, bundled up, Bible on her lap, my hand on her hand. The black Cadillac Escalade came up the drive. Behind it, a silver Mercedes sedan. Behind that, a black BMW. 3 vehicles, 6 men. They parked in a neat line in front of the porch. Beaumont got out of the Cadillac first. He was smiling. Because it was Sunday, and by his math it was Sunday, and he had every reason in the world to believe he had won. Delphine got out of the passenger side. Then Halloran got out of the Cadillac's back seat. He was wearing a gray overcoat. He looked at me. I looked at him. I did not smile. Preston Kade got out of the Mercedes, slick-haired, 50. Watch that cost $40,000. And behind him, 2 appraisers in polo shirts and khakis. They all walked toward the porch together. Beaumont led. He stopped at the bottom step. He put his hands in his suit pockets. He looked up at me. He said, "Emmalyn, good morning. I trust everything is in order." I said, "Good morning, Uncle Beaumont." He said, "The keys, please." I said, "The keys." He said, "The keys to the house and the outbuildings, everything on the deed." I did not move. I stayed on the porch swing. I stayed with my hand on my sister's hand. He said, "Emmalyn, do not make this difficult." I said, "I will not." He said, "Then the keys." I said, "The keys to what?" He blinked. He said, "The keys, Emmalyn, to the property." I said, "But you said the property was insolvent." He said, "It is." I said, "Then what does Kade Ridge Partners want with an insolvent 40 acres? Beaumont's smile went stiff. Preston Kade shifted his weight. Halloran stepped forward. He said, "Emmalyn, sweetheart, let's not be difficult. Your grandfather would not want this to be difficult. I know how much he loved you. I want to help you through this." I looked at him. Gray overcoat, gray hair, gray eyes. 22 years of Sunday suppers. I said, "Mr. Halloran." He said, "Yes, sweetheart." I said, "How much did he pay you?" Halloran's face did a thing, a very small thing, but I saw it. The corners of his mouth pulled down. His eyes flicked just for a second to Beaumont. Beaumont said sharply, "Emmalyn, what are you talking about?" I said, "How much did he pay you to draft the forged power of attorney, Mr. Halloran? Was it a flat fee or a percentage of the sale?" Preston Kade took a step backward. He said, "Beaumont, what is happening? What is she talking about?" Beaumont said, "Nothing. She is upset. She is grieving. She is confused." I said, "I am not confused." Beaumont said, "Emmalyn, you are making a scene in front of my business partners. I will not tolerate this. Give me the keys right now, or I will have you charged with obstruction, and I will have your sister removed today." "Not tomorrow, today. I have paperwork in my car." I stood up. I set the Bible down on the swing beside my sister. I walked to the top of the porch steps. I looked down at my uncle, and I said the words I had been rehearsing in my head for 48 hours. I said, "Uncle Beaumont, my grandfather knew about you. He knew about you 6 months ago. He knew about the water rights in the Shell Company in the Cayman Islands, and the wire transfers from Kade Ridge, and the trace signature, and Mr. Halloran and the deal you cut with Preston. He knew all of it. He had it recorded, he had it documented, he had it filed. And this morning, I paused. I let it hang. This morning, he asked me to introduce you to some people. I looked to my left. Nathaniel Prewitt stepped out of the shadow of the porch column. Behind him from the mudroom door, 2 FBI agents. From the far side of the porch, 2 state troopers. From behind the machinery barn, walking calmly up the driveway, now 3 more. Beaumont's face went the color of paper. Preston Kade dropped his coffee cup. Halloran turned to run. Halloran did not get 3 steps. An FBI agent had his arm behind his back before he cleared the second stair. Beaumont said, "This is illegal. My rights." Prewitt walked down the porch steps very slowly. He stopped in front of my uncle. He held out a badge. He held out a folded document. He said, "Beaumont Roland Hollister, I am Nathaniel Prewitt, Assistant United States Attorney for the District of Montana. I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of wire fraud, forgery of a federal document, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, aggravated identity, theft, and racketeering. You have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you use that right." He said, "Turn around, please." Beaumont did not turn around. Beaumont's knees buckled. Beaumont sat down, right there, in the wet gravel, his $3,000 suit in the mud, his face in his hands. Delphine took 1 step back, 2 steps back. Then she looked at me, straight at me, for the first time in 11 years, and she mouthed one word, "Sorry." I did not react. I could not. The agents cuffed Beaumont in the gravel. They stood him up. They walked him toward the sedan behind the barn. He did not resist. He did not speak. He walked like a man who had already gone somewhere else in his head, to a place where none of this was happening. Preston Kade was cuffed next. Halloran wept. Halloran actually wept. They took him last. When it was done, the driveway was full of federal vehicles. And silent, Prewitt walked back up onto the porch. He put a hand on my shoulder. He said, "You did it." I said, "Grandpa did it." He said, "You finished it." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "You go inside. You take your sister. You sit down. You breathe." I nodded. He walked away. I turned. I sat down beside my sister on the porch swing. She had not moved. She had not spoken. I put my arm around her. She put her face in my shoulder. We did not say anything for a very long time. The frost on the pasture began to melt in the mid-morning sun. Steam rose off the ground in slow ribbons. A red-tailed hawk called from somewhere over the tree line. And in that quiet, in that impossible quiet, I did the last thing I expected to do. I bowed my head. And for the first time in 7 years, without meaning to, without thinking about it, without preparing for it, I prayed. I said, "Thank you." Just that. Thank you. The words did not bounce off the ceiling. They went somewhere. I felt them go somewhere. The next week was a blur. The federal investigation had been building for 18 months. Once Prewitt had the ledger and the audio files, indictments came down within 9 days. Beaumont, Halloran, Preston Kade, 3 Kade Ridge executives, a hydrology firm owner in Bozeman, a county clerk in Hamilton who had been paid $2,000 to look the other way. 9 people total, federal charges, serious prison time on the table. Delphine turned herself in on Tuesday morning. She walked into Prewitt's office in Missoula alone. She said she wanted to make a statement. She said she had known some of what Beaumont was doing and had suspected more and had said nothing because she was afraid of him. She said, "I want my punishment, whatever it is." Prewitt called me from his car afterwards. He said, "Emmalyn, your aunt just did something very hard. She may end up with probation instead of prison because of it. I thought you should know." I did not say anything for a long minute. Then I said, "Thank you, sir." That week, we also opened the trust. The attorney in Missoula drove down to the farm. He sat at the kitchen table with me and Wrenley. He walked us through what we own. The cars were ours, free and clear. The farm was ours, free and clear. There was, in addition, a savings account in Grandpa's name with just under $400,000 in it. Ours, free and clear. The lawyer said, "What would you like to do?" I looked at Wrenley. Wrenley looked at me. I said, "Can we think about it?" He said, "Take all the time in the world." He said, "But girls, I want you to know one thing. Your grandfather did not build this so you would be rich. He built it so you would be free. There is a difference. He wanted you to know the difference." He left. We stood in the kitchen. I said, "Free. She said, free. I said, that's a big word. She said, yeah. I said, let's sleep on it. We slept on it for 3 months. While we slept on it, the leaves fell off the apple trees, and the first real snow came, and the wood stove ran day and night, and Wrenley went back to school, and the school board fell over themselves to make sure she was okay, and her English teacher started leaving casseroles on our porch every Wednesday for reasons that had nothing to do with any of the events. And I applied to the University of Montana for spring semester. Pre-veterinary program. I did not know if I would go, but I applied. Wrenley made me apply. Somewhere in the middle of those 3 months on a cold Sunday afternoon, I was cleaning out the bunker beneath the shed because it needed cleaning, because the corkboard needed to come down, because it was time. I was pulling documents off the wall and boxing them up when Wrenley came down the stairs. She said, Emmy? I said, yeah. She said, there's a box under the driver's seat of the big black key. I said, the Duesenberg. She said, the Duesenberg. I said, did you look inside it? She said, no. I said, why not? She said, because I thought we should open it together. We opened it together. Inside the box, wrapped in brown paper and twine, was a leather-bound journal. The leather was cracked with age. The pages were the color of weak tea. The handwriting was old-fashioned, sloping, beautiful. Not my grandfather's. At the top of the first page, dated November 3rd, 1943, I am Elias Hollister. I am 31 years old. I am a mechanic in Stevensville, Montana, and I have just made a promise to God that I am going to write down here so I do not forget it. We read the journal in one sitting, both of us on the concrete floor of the bunker, backs against the tire of the Duesenberg, Wrenley's shoulder against mine. My great-grandfather had made a promise to a Baptist minister in the winter of 1943. There was a family, a Jewish family, just off the boat, just off the run from Europe. They had arrived in America with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a distant cousin and the terror of a continent behind them. The cousin had reached out to a quiet network of rural pastors and mechanics and farmers who had agreed to help settle Jewish refugee families in small Western communities during the war years, away from the crowded coasts, away from the fear. My great-grandfather, Elias, was the mechanic in the network. He owned 3 cars, 3 fast cars. He used them to drive families, from train stations to farmhouses. In the winter, in the dark, off the main roads, 9 families, 37 people. The journal named every one of them, including the youngest, a little girl named Ruthie, 6 years old, who had lost her whole family in Europe, except for one uncle in Butte. Elias had driven her from a train station in Fargo to that uncle's house in the Blue Cobra in February of 1944, in a blizzard, with her wrapped in 3 blankets in the front passenger seat. Elias had bought a 4th car later, in 1957, the Duesenberg, to hold the story, to be the reminder, to be the thing that never got sold. I had made his son Silas promise on his deathbed in '98 that the cars would never be sold, not until the last of the 37 had passed away. And even then, only if the family they had all become could agree together what to do. He had said, some things are not for money, some things are for memory. If you forget which is which, you have already lost. At the very back of the journal, in different handwriting on a folded slip of stationery, was a note in my grandfather's blue ink cursive. Girls, I do not know how many of the 37 are still living. The youngest, Ruthie, would be in her late 80s now, but there are grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and a story that has never been told outside of one leather journal in one small church in Stevensville. Do with the cars what you and God together decide, but please do it in a way that lets someone remember. I love you, Grandpa. Wrenley was crying by the end. I was too. 6 months later, we did the following things in this order. We did not sell the Duesenberg. We loaned it on a permanent basis to a private memorial gallery specializing in stories of Jewish refugee resettlement in the American West during the Second World War. The car was displayed with the journal in a glass case beside it and a plaque on the wall that named all 37 people my great-grandfather had driven to safety. Ruthie was still alive. She was 88. She lived with her granddaughter. She came to the opening of the exhibit in a wheelchair. She put her hand on the hood of the Blue Cobra, the car she had ridden in as a 6-year-old girl in a blizzard. She said something to me in a language I did not understand. Her granddaughter translated. She said, "Your great-grandfather drove me through the night. I remember him singing. I did not understand the words, but I understood the singing. I could not speak." I put my arms around her. She put her arms around me. And two women, one on either end of a story that had been carried by 3 generations of my family, held each other and cried. We auctioned the Three Cobras, a major auction house in New York. The following spring, they sold for a combined figure that would have made my grandfather laugh out loud in the kitchen. We paid off every farmer within 100 miles of Stevensville who had lost his water rights to the Ravalli County corruption Beaumont had helped enable. We paid taxes forward on the Hollister farm for the next 50 years in a trust that could not be touched. We rebuilt the roof of the Little White Baptist Church where my great-grandfather had made his promise. We paid for a new furnace at Pastor Bramwell's parsonage. Twice. Because he did not tell us the first one was broken until we already had it installed. And with what was left, we founded the Elias Hollister Memorial Scholarship. It sends children from Ravalli County to college. Without regard to religion, without regard to background, only need, only merit, only the willingness to give something back. Wrenley designed the logo. It is a small drawing of an apple tree with the outline of a car parked underneath. Beaumont accepted a plea deal. 7 years. He is at a minimum security federal facility. He writes me letters. I do not open them yet. Someday I might. My grandfather said mercy might come, but only after consequences. So I am waiting on both. Halloran got 4 years. Preston Kade got 12. The rest are still working through court. Delphine got probation, 2 years. She lives in a small apartment in Missoula. She works at a nonprofit that helps elderly people file paperwork with the state so they do not get taken advantage of by their own relatives. She says it is penance. I don't argue. She comes to Sunday supper once a month. Wrenley set that. Wrenley is the moral center of our entire family. Our grandfather knew what he was doing. 2 winters later. Wrenley is 16. I am 20. I am home from the University of Montana for winter break. My hands smell like antiseptic from the veterinary clinic where I intern. My sister is taller now. Not much taller, but enough. We drive out to the cemetery on a Sunday afternoon. The snow is deep. We wear boots. We stop at the marker. Silas Hollister, 1943 to 2025. Beloved husband, father, grandfather. We stand quietly. Wrenley pulls a folded piece of paper out of her coat pocket. She lays it on the marker. It is a certificate from the Memorial Gallery. Naming the Duesenberg, naming Elias Hollister, naming the 37. She whispers, "Grandpa, we remembered." I say nothing. I do not need to. The wind moves through the pines at the edge of the cemetery, just once, then goes still. And I think about all the things my grandfather said and did not say in his long, quiet life. And I think about the shed he built, and the promise he kept, and the trap he set, and the granddaughters he trusted to finish it. And I understand, finally, that a legacy is not something you leave behind. A legacy is what the next generation chooses to do with what you leave behind. My great-grandfather chose to save people. My grandfather chose to protect that story. My sister and I chose to tell it. The chain has one more link now. And someday when we are old, when our hair is silver and our hands are wrinkled and our voices are quiet, like Grandpa's was quiet, we will hand it to whoever comes next. Grandpa always said, whichever comes first. He said it every Sunday morning at the breakfast table. He said it with a small smile. He said it like a man who knew a secret. I understand the secret now. The end.